Today we're solving quadratic equations with complex solutions. So last time we learned about what a complex number is and how to deal with it. So we're going to just kind of lean on what we learned there. Let's look at example 1. First of all, we want to look, is there an x squared and an x? There's not. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at this x squared. We want to get it all alone. So we're going to minus 9 from both sides of the equal sign. And we get x squared equals negative 9. Now the opposite of square is square root, so we're going to take square root of both sides. We also want to remember the plus or minus sign. Whenever we take the square root of both sides, we put in a plus or minus sign. The square and square root cancel, and I get x equals plus or minus. The negative comes out front as an I, and then the square root of 9 breaks down to 3 and 3, so it comes out as a 3. So we're going to say this is plus or minus 3i as our answer there. Looking at number 2, we have an x squared and an x, so we want to see if it will easily factor. If it was going to factor, we would be looking for two things that multiply to 13 and add to 5. The only two things that multiply to 13 are 1 and 13, and those will not ever add or subtract to equal 5. So we are going to always, if it won't factor, we go into the quadratic formula. We're going to write down our a, b, and c. Now, if there's not a number in the front of an x, our x squared, it's going to be a 1. So our a value is 1, our b value is 5, and our c value is 13. We're going to use quadratic formula. X equals negative b. B is 5, so our negative b would be a negative 5 plus or minus the square root. B squared, 5 times 5 is 25, minus 4 times 1 times 13, all over 2 times 1. Now we simplify underneath the square root, and we simplify what is in the denominator. We have negative 5 plus or minus. The 2 times 1 is 2, so let's get that real quick. When I plug 25 minus 4 times 1 times 13 into my calculator, I get a negative 27. When I simplify the 27, I get 9 times 3 and 3 times 3. The 3 comes out front. The negative also comes out front as an I. So I have negative 5 plus or minus 3 times I times square root of 3 all over 2. Now I'm just going to simplify this. I'm going to split it apart. I'm going to have negative 5 over 2 plus or minus 3i squared root of 3 over 2 as well. That would be my answer. There's a few ways I can type it in. I can say negative 5 over 2 plus 3i squared root of 3 over 2. I could also, and then put a comma and negative 5 over 2 minus 3i squared root of 3 over 2. I could type it in this way, I could type it in this way, or I could type it in this way. All three of those will work out just fine. Okay, looking at number 3, there's an x squared and an x, but the problem is here it's not set equal to 0, so we need to add 10 to both sides of the equal sign. X squared plus 7x plus 10 equals 0. Now I want to look to see if this will factor. Two things that multiply to 10 and add to 7. I've got 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. If I take 2 plus 5, it equals 7. So this will easily factor. Plus 2 plus 5, this equals 0. So now we're going to take each piece and set it equal to 0. We've got x plus 2 equals 0. Remember that zero product property. If you have two things that multiply to equal 0, either the first one has to equal 0 or the second one. We're going to minus 2 from both sides of the equal sign. X equals a negative 2. Minus 5 from both sides of the equal sign, and x equals negative 5. Now this is not an imaginary or complex solution. These are real answers. Okay, let's look at number 4. We have an x squared and an x, so we want to set it equal to 0 by adding 1 to both sides. 3x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now I want to check to see if this will factor. I'm going to take the 3 times 1 gives me 3. Two things that multiply to 3 and add to 2. I've got 1 and 3 are the only things that multiply to 3. Now since this is a positive 3, both of these either need to be positive or both of them need to be negative. And 3 plus 1 is going to give me 4, not 2. So this is not going to factor, so we have to use our quadratic formula. We're going to write down our A, our B, and our C. A equals 3, B equals 2, and C equals 1. Okay, using the quadratic formula, we have x equals negative b. B is 2, so negative b would be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared. 2 squared is a 4 minus 4 times a is 3 times c is 1 all over 2 times our a, which is 3. Now we're going to simplify underneath the square root and in the denominator. Negative 2 plus or minus, 2 times 3 gives us a 6 in the denominator. Now I'm going to do this one by hand. I have 4 times 3 times 1. 4 times 3 is 12, times 1 is 12. So this is the same as saying 4 minus 12, and 4 minus 12 is a negative 8. So I'm going to have a negative 8 under that square root. So we know this is a complex solution or imaginary. We're going to bring that negative out as an I. We're going to break down the 8, 4 times 2 and 2 times 2. The 2's come out front as well because they're a match. We have negative 2 plus or minus 2i squared of 2 all over 6. Now if we break this apart, this is going to be negative 2 over 6 plus or minus 2i squared of 2 all over 6. Now we're going to simplify this. 2 6 is 1/3, negative 1/3 plus or minus. The 2 goes into 2 once, the 2 goes into 6 3 times. So we're going to have plus or minus. Now 1 times I is just an I squared of 2 all over 3. So this would be our answer there. Now number 5 and 6 are really similar to the first 4. Except we're finding the zeros. So whenever we're finding the zeros, this is another way of saying x-intercepts. So whenever we have x-intercepts, we put a 0 in for y or f of x. So we're going to put a 0 in for this f of x here. Now there's not an x squared and an x. So what we want to do is we want to say negative 2x squared minus 72. So if there's not an x squared and an x, you want to solve for that x squared. We're going to add 72 to both sides of the equal sign. Get 72 equals negative 2x squared. Divide both sides by a negative 2 to get the x squared alone. And we get negative 36 equals x squared. Opposite of squared is square root. We're going to add in our plus or minus sign. The negative comes out as an I, and 6 times 6 is 36. So that is going to come out front also. So we're going to have plus or minus 6i, and the square and square root cancel, and that equals x. Okay, number 6 is the same. We're going to put a 0 in for our y value or f of x. So we're going to say 0 equals 2x squared minus x minus 3. We can look to see, does this factor? So let's look at this. 2 times negative 3 is a negative 6. We've got 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. We're trying to get them to add to a negative 1. Now, if I take a negative 3 and a positive 2, 2 times negative 3 gives me a negative 6 when I multiply them, and 2 minus 3 gives me a negative 1 when I add them. So this is going to factor. We're going to take our numbers. We're going to say 2x squared plus 2x minus 3x minus 3, and we're going to have our lightning bolt in there. We take our first two and we want to say, what do they have in common? Well, they both have a 2 and they both have an x. So we're going to pull that out, 2 times x. If I divide a 2x out of the first piece, I get x left, plus 2x divided by 2x is a 1. Now, whatever sign you have here, you're going to bring it down. There's a 3 in common in both of the pieces, both of these second two pieces. They both have a 3, so we divide it out. If I divide a negative 3 out, these cancel, and I'm just left with an x. And a negative 3 divided by a negative 3 is going to give me a positive 1 here. Now, you know you did it right if these two parentheses end up being the same thing. Our first parenthesis would be 2x minus 3. Our second one is an x plus 1. Remember, that's equaling 0. The zero product property tells us if we have two things that multiply together to equal 0, then either the first one has to equal 0 or the second one has to equal 0. So I'm going to say that 2x minus 3 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. We want to solve both of them for x. We're going to add 3 to both sides of the equal sign. 2x equals 3. Divide by 2. My first answer is going to be x equals 3 halves. On the second piece, we minus 1 from both sides of the equal sign, and x equals negative 1. So we have two real answers. These are not imaginary. Okay, number 7, we want to look at two things. We want to find the x-intercepts, or the zeros, so we put a 0 in for f of x. This looks like it could factor maybe, so let's just check and see. So we want to find two things that add to negative 6 and multiply to 10. So 10 would be 1 and 10, or 2 and 5. Now, if I add or subtract 1 and 10, I'm not going to get a negative 6. And 5 and 2 will not give me a negative 6 either. So this is not going to factor. We are going to have to use the quadratic formula. We write down our a, our b, and our c. If there's not a number in front of the x squared, it's a 1. B is whatever is in front of the negatives, or whatever is in front of this x, which is negative 6, and the c is the number on its own. We're going to have x equals negative b. B is negative 6, so negative b, negative 6 would be a positive 6, plus or minus the square root. B squared, negative 6 times negative 6 is a positive 36, minus 4 times our a, which is 1, times our c, which is 10, all over 2 times a. 2 times 1 is 2. Now we're going to simplify what's underneath this square root here. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 10 is 40. So this is going to be like 36 minus 40, which is a negative 4. So I'm going to have 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 all over 2. We're going to break apart our pieces. We're going to have 6 divided by 2 is 3, plus or minus. We have, let's simplify what's underneath this square root. The square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. The negative comes out as an I. So we're going to have 3 plus or minus. The 2 comes out with the I, so plus or minus 2i all over 2. We can simplify that to be 3 over 2 plus or minus 2i over 2. But 2 over 2 is just a 1. So this is going to simplify to just an I at the end. 3 halves plus or minus I. But you could write it like this piece or this piece. Either one of those will work. If we were to separate these, we could say 3 halves plus I, comma, 3 halves minus I. Both of those, all three of those would be answers that you could write. Number 8, a baseball player hits a foul ball straight up in the air. So let's just draw a little picture. from a height of 4 feet off the ground. So when it hits the bat, the ball is 4 feet off the ground. This is going to be represented by this +4 here. This 85 feet is the velocity. It comes right here, and this -16 is the effect of gravity on the ball. The catcher catches the ball when it is 6 feet from the ground. How long is the ball in the air? So let's write this equation. H of t equals -16t squared plus 85 plus 4. If we're catching it when it's 6 feet from the ground, how long is the ball in the air? We're trying to find t when h of t is equaling 6. So there's kind of this hint here, right here. We're going to put a 6 in for our h of t. So 6 equals -16t squared plus 85. It looks like I forgot that t in there. Let me just add that in. Plus 4. Now remember, if we have a t squared and a t, or an x squared and an x, we want to set it equal to 0 so we can use that 0 product property. I'm going to -6 from both sides of the equal sign. I get 0 equals -16t squared plus 85t minus 2. Now, this looks like it would be kind of, these are going to be big numbers. We're going to have -32, and I don't think there's any way to get 85. So it's not going to factor. So let's go ahead and, if you have big numbers like this, just go to quadratic formula. It will be an easier way to do it. We're going to write our A equals, our B equals, and our C equals. A, remember, is the number in front of the t squared. So I'm going to have a -16. B is going to be my 85, and C is my -2. Now, normally when we use the quadratic formula, it's x equals, but where we have t values here, we're going to say t equals, but everything else is the same. -b, -85, plus or minus the square root, b squared 85 squared. I don't really know what that is, but we will put it in the calculator. -4 times a is -16 times c is a -2. This is going to be all over 2 times -16. This gives us 7097. So I'm going to have -85 plus or minus the square root of 7097 all over -32. Now we're going to type that in. I'm going to clear this. I'm going to hit my fraction key first, and I have -85. I don't have a plus or minus sign. I put a plus in first. Square root 7097 all over -32. Okay, so the first one is, my first answer is 0.02 seconds. So this is going to be instantly after the ball is hit, 0.02 seconds. The second one, I'm going to take that numerator plus, I'm going to delete it and type in a minus, and it's going to be 5.29 seconds. So it's going to say how long is the ball in the air. Now I wouldn't want to say 0.2 seconds, because that is going to be instantly after the ball is hit. So that is not going to be my answer. We're looking how long is it going to be caught in the air. This would be the 5.29 seconds. So sometimes you get multiple answers, but you have to differentiate by kind of thinking about which one are we talking about, which answer are we talking about. So that would be the 5.29 seconds. Number 9, a golfer hits a golf ball on the fairway with an initial velocity of 80 feet per second. Remember that 80 feet is the B value, is the velocity. And the height in feet of the ball, t seconds after it is hit, can be modeled by this function. we want to find the maximum height of the golf ball. Now, if you remember, to find a maximum height, the maximum is on the vertex, and the vertex is on the axis of symmetry. Now, if an equation is in standard form, we're going to use the equation x equals, in this case it's going to be t equals negative b over 2a to find the axis of symmetry. So we're going to write down our a, b, and c value. Our a is equal to negative 16, our b is equal to 80, and our c is equal to 0.1. We're going to use this to find the maximum time, the time where it's a maximum, and then we can plug that in to get the maximum height. So let's go ahead and time is equal to negative b, so negative 80 over 2 times negative 16, negative 80 divided by negative 32. Let's put that in the calculator. Okay, and this gives us 2.5 seconds. So it takes 2.5 seconds for this to get off of, to hit the maximum point. Now we're going to take 2.5 seconds and we're going to take that 2.5 seconds and plug it in to everywhere there's a t, and that will give us the maximum height. So that will give us the height when the time is at a maximum. So in our calculator, we're going to just clear this out. We're going to just take this equation here, and everywhere there's a t, we're going to put a 2.5 in. So I'm going to start with the negative 16, then put a parenthesis, but instead of the t squared here, I'm going to put in a 2.5. Then I'm going to have plus 80. And again, this next time I'm going to have a parenthesis. I'm going to take that 2.5 and plug it in where there's a t. And then I have plus 0.1, and I get 100.1. This is in feet. So at the maximum height that this gets is 100.1 feet. So how long, this time we're looking for how long does it take for this to hit the ground. Okay, so we're asking a different question here. How long does it take to hit the ground? So what we want to do is we want to set it equal to 0. We're going to say 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 0.1. We want to know how long, so we're looking for time. We're going to use our quadratic formula of time. Instead of x equals, we're going to use t equals the quadratic formula. So we're going to say time equals, we're going to write down our a, b, and c values. A is negative 16, b is 80, c is 0.1. T equals negative b, b is 80, so we have negative 80 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, so we're going to simplify what's underneath the square root. So we get 6406.4 if I type in underneath the square root, and 2 times negative 16 is a negative 32. So now I'm going to type all of it in. So on my first number, I get negative 0.0001. And on my second one, I'm going to take that plus, delete it, and change it to a minus, and I get about 5 seconds. Now, the first one, it doesn't make sense that it would take negative time for something to happen. So about 5 seconds is what we're looking at. Number 10, we're looking at, we have this equation. 35 is our velocity, and we're starting at 7 feet off the air, into the air. does the ball reach a height of 30 feet? So we're looking to see, does this parabola go below the 30 feet or is it on the 30 feet? So when I get my height, I'm going to put 30 feet in for the height. I have a t squared and a t, so I want to take that 30 and I want to pull it to the other side of the equal sign by minusing 30 from both sides of the equal sign. This looks like it's going to be way too hard to factor. Those are big numbers, so I'm not even going to attempt to factor it. I'm just going to go right to the quadratic formula. A is negative 16, B is 35, C is negative 23. X, well, this time it's not x equals, it's a t for time equals negative b, negative 35, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 35 squared, minus 4 times our a times our c, all over 2 times negative 23. Now right away, I'm looking at this and I get negative 35 plus or minus the square root of negative 247 all over negative 46. I'm looking at this equation. Since I have a negative 247 here, that tells me right away that this will not ever happen. That's not a real number. So it's impossible for it to hit 30 feet. This negative tells me it does not hit 30 feet. And the parabola, it comes up, but it does not reach the 30 feet. So we get an imaginary number, which tells us that the ball will not hit 30 feet. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try 26 feet this time. Instead of 30 being put in for height, we're going to put 26 in there. And it's just asking it, does it hit 26 feet? So we actually don't have to solve it. We just need to figure out the discriminant, which is the b squared minus 4ac. So if I take my b squared minus 4ac, I get 35 squared minus 4 times a is negative 16 times c is negative 19. I'm going to put that in my calculator, and this gives me a positive 9. So I'm going to have a square root of 9. That's going to be a positive answer. I'm going to have plus or minus that, so I'm going to have 2 places where it's going to hit 26 feet. We'll have one on the way up and one on the way down. So let's explain it. Yes, because we have a positive number under the square root.